Hey all, here at OS Reviews, you're watching our review of the Keecoo P11. This is a really low-cost Android smartphone that retails for under $80 unlocked, making it one of the least expensive options that you can find through exporters like GearBest. It's completely unlocked, has no contract, you can simply pop in a SIM card, and you're ready to go. We've also seen another low-cost smartphone lately called the Ulefone S8 Pro, which I considered as a really excellent value at that price because performance was excellent, and on paper the P11 should best the S8 Plus, just because it has a larger screen, that newer 2:1 aspect ratio that gives you more screen to body on the front. It looks a lot more expensive, it's a unibody build, but whether or not the performance holds up is another story, and we'll be discussing that in this video. So first, a quick refresher on the specs. We have a 5.7-inch HD Plus display. It's not full 1080p, but it's 720p. Still, it produces fairly natural looking colors. It's a capacitive screen with 5 fingers multi-touch that offers a pretty responsive overall experience. We also have the quad-core MediaTek 6737 processor coupled with 2 gigs of built-in RAM, along with 16 gigs of built-in storage and Android 7.0 on board. We have a single camera on the back, which is actually in a way pretty refreshing because a lot of Chinese manufacturers would put on 2 cameras, but as you guys probably know by now, the second camera isn't very effective. In fact, some claim it's entirely fake. So they focus on just having one good lens on this. There's also a fingerprint scanner and a 2,700 milliamp hour capacity battery, which is reasonable size for a slightly smaller 5.7-inch phone. In terms of design, you'll notice that it looks very similar to a lot of Xiaomi's offerings, including the Redmi 5 and the 5 Plus. So in fact, if you put it next to each other, you can definitely tell where some of the inspiration came from the placement of the camera and the fingerprint scanner on the back. However, the P11 is definitely a lot cheaper, both in price as well as in build, because it's made entirely out of plastic instead of aluminum. So it's a lot more lightweight, but as a whole, still feels fairly comfortable in the hand. It doesn't creak or cringe, and manages to present a pretty slim and lightweight solution. On the side, there's access to the SIM card tray. The top gives us a standard 3.5mm headphone jack, which is always nice to see. The other side has a volume rocker and a dedicated power key, and the bottom here features the slightly older micro USB for charging and for syncing. In terms of the fingerprint scanner, it actually is fairly fast and responsive, not quite as quick as on a Xiaomi device, but compared to other low-end, mid-end smartphones on the market, it seems to be pretty accurate and does a respectable job. And there is no app tray on the bottom that consolidates all of your applications. Instead, we have unlimited pages to populate with more apps and programs, and it also loops, so you can always cycle back and forth between these panels. So it's a little bit inspired by iOS, definitely not quite as vanilla as what I would have liked compared to something like the Ulefone S8 Pro, which gives you a much more stock experience. So I think for many that will be actually a better buy in terms of the software. We have this drag down notification shade for changing things like the brightness as well as connectivity options. We have the standard array of Wi-Fi, dual band, Bluetooth, and GPS built right on in. The screen here does get reasonably bright. It's an IPS LCD panel, which offers pretty good viewing angles, and truth be told, smartphone displays have been getting a lot better in the past few years. In 2018, even displays on low-end smartphones like this already produce pretty good-looking colors and wide viewing angles, so no complaints there. It's also, again, very sensitive, as you can see there. Bezel sizes are also pretty small and impressive. It's actually a little smaller than even on Xiaomi's Redmi 5 and 5 Plus, so they did a great job in terms of the design. The controls on the bottom here can also be tucked away if you don't want to use them, which is a nice little trick. In addition, the phone does have the ability to use Google Assistant or Google Now, so I can tap and hold to launch into the Smart AI Assistant for quickly searching up things by voice, setting appointments, things like that. Alright, so next let's take a quick look at the camera. Performance of the camera, again, isn't going to be the strongest suit of the P11 just because, again, it's a really low-cost phone. Again, it has a 13-megapixel sensor. I can tap to focus, and it actually is very quick at taking shots. The interface is, again, quite reminiscent of iOS, so this phone is pretty inspired by, Apple in terms of its software design. And what's funny is there's even an SLR, or a bokeh mode, that basically does the exact same thing as the quote-unquote dual-lens phones on the market by capturing a circle, and everything in the circle is in focus, everything outside is out of focus. So that's the trick that they also built into the software here. There's a side panel on this device where they give you a few additional options for noise reduction, scene selection modes, things like that, that you can play around with. Under good lighting environments, your shots can also turn out to be pretty respectable, definitely shareable on social media. My biggest issue is compared with the Ulefone S8 Plus, which is the same price. I feel like the S8 Plus has slightly better image quality. It's just a bit more consistent. On here, it's very quick to capture shots, but sometimes it can overexpose, let's say, the sky and wipe out some of the details. But as a whole, it's, again, is more than respectable on such a low-cost phone. It's just nowhere near as good as more expensive flagship-level devices, of course. And even in this particular price range, I have seen slightly better cameras in terms of performance consistency, but as a whole, not bad. And also, if you turn on HDR mode, that will improve the overall experience slightly. Indoor shots were also fairly good. It actually captures pretty realistic looking colors, and more importantly, the flash does a good job of illuminating your subjects without overexposing them. For web browsing, the browser app on the bottom here actually takes you to a WebKit-based layout. It's actually slightly modified. It's not quite as elegant in terms of the UI UX as on the Chrome browser, which is why I prefer that one. So you can find it under the Google folder and then pull this one up. It's slightly faster, a little bit smoother in my opinion in terms of transitions. Overall, I would say that you just have to be slightly more patient for everything to completely load. You probably have to wait 10 seconds longer, 20 seconds longer for everything to render on a really complex site like this. And with a little bit more limited RAM, you also have to be a bit more patient as far as for everything to reload if you are jumping back and forth between different programs and apps. But the New York Times is a very difficult page for most devices just because it has a lot of these ads, a lot of these videos, scrolling elements, but you can see that it's handled respectably on this phone. Sometimes you have to wait for a split second for it to think, but as a whole, it's more than usable. So an overall pretty good web browsing experience, especially with this nice wide aspect ratio that allows you to see more of the web page at once. Testing out the sound quality and the video playback experience. So we are just using the regular YouTube app right now. Right, so pausing the audio sample there, the takeaway is the sound quality is definitely not the forte of the P11. In fact, it's a little bit weaker than, I would say, the average smartphone that I've been testing thus far. It just produces a little bit less noise than what I'd like, so not quite as loud. It's also not quite as rich or powerful as something you'd really want to listen to music consistently. It's perfectly adequate for sharing songs on YouTube with friends and family, but for longer videos, for watching movies, I would suggest the headphone jack or using Bluetooth. Again, Ulefone S8 Pro did have a slightly louder, a more powerful speaker, so that's something to keep in mind. The phone call quality also seems to be quite consistent. When I tested out earlier with T-Mobile here in the Seattle region, my caller said that my voice actually sounded reasonably loud and clean even when I was outdoors, and I could hear them without too many problems in the earpiece. Reception quality was also good. If we go into the phone settings, we can indeed see that we are running on Android 7.0 Nougat, so not quite up to date compared to Android 8.0 devices, but on a really low-cost phone, again, I would say that it's acceptable. For app support, you can open up and load any program that you would want from the Play Store, including games and productivity titles. You just have to wait for slightly longer since the processor here isn't really powerful. But again, it's pretty similar to the Ulefone S8 Pro, I would say. In most practical cases, you just have to wait for 5 to 10 seconds longer for 3D titles to completely load, such as Asphalt 8. But afterwards, it will still open up, and there's not too many problems as far as playing back those titles. In the home screen here, you can also change how the effects of the transitions are like. So you can change things like zoom in, zoom out in terms of going back and forth between the panels, as you can see there. So it gives you quite a few customization options for the widgets and how you want the transitions to go. RAM management also seems to be sufficient. If you are playing back a 3D game or something really intensive, I would suggest exiting out of the prior programs before. But right now we have a handful of regular apps, including browser tabs, music, etc. open, the camera open, and we have about 521 megabytes available out of the 2 gigs of RAM, so about a fourth that's remaining, which is a decent amount that you can still use to open up a few more games without too many problems. And so there seems to still be, sufficient RAM for multitasking without having to re-render all the apps when you open them up back again. So 2 gigs will be sufficient, I would say, for light users and for daily use. During operation, it does get slightly warm on the region closer to the top towards the fingerprint scanner, but it's not crippling. It still is reasonably comfortable to hold. And again, performance for the most part is pretty consistent after I tested it out for the past few days. So that's more or less it as far as our review of the Keecoo P11. I would say that at $80, it definitely is a very good value for your money, especially if you're looking for a phone with that new 2:1 aspect ratio that takes advantage of this new display size that's easier to hold in one hand, but also gives you a larger area for watching videos and interacting with media. It is a pretty entry-level device, though, in terms of specs, so definitely don't expect lightning-fast performance. It also has a pretty heavy customization on Android, which is not going to be everyone's cup of tea. But overall, I'd say that if looks, as well as the new aspect ratio screen having a larger display, isn't your top priority, then the Ulefone S8 Pro is a better buy overall, just because I think it has a slightly better build quality that's made out of aluminum and metal. It has slightly faster performance just because it is a stock Android device instead of having a lot of this customization going on, but this isn't too bad at all in terms of daily speed, as you can see here. Pretty quick. I just think that the Ulefone has a slightly better camera and a slightly sharper display. But again, if you do want that 2:1 aspect ratio, then this P11 by Keecoo certainly is not a bad choice, especially as a first attempt from a relatively new smartphone manufacturer. So you can check out more details about this in our article, but for now, this has been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. This has been the Keecoo P11, again, an ultra-budget Android 7.0 smartphone with that new 18:9 aspect ratio display.